Hello and welcome to Seed Speaks. My name is Sonja Begemann. I'm the editorial director here at Seed World Group. And I'm excited because today we're talking about something that happens in the workplace a lot more often than you might think. We're talking about imposter syndrome. What this is it's self-doubt about personal abilities and feeling like a fraud when presented with accolades, promotions, or other achievements. And this phenomenon is incredibly common. In fact, 75% of women in executive positions report feeling like they're an imposter. And men experience these feelings too, but they're less likely to report it. Just because imposter syndrome is common doesn't mean it's without a cure. Joining me today are three experts who are going to talk to us about their personal experiences with it, what they're doing to overcome it, and what recommendations they have for helping you and your employees overcome imposter syndrome. First, we have Jennifer Campbell. She is an author, a freelance writer, podcaster, social media influencer, and voice for agriculture. This Central Indiana content producer raises corn, soybeans, wheat, hogs, and cattle, and is a columnist for DTN and co host of Girls Talk Ag. As an author, she looks to educate children about the agricultural industry with her story, Meet Pete. We also have Lynn Sonosky. She's an assistant professor at Cornell, a weed scientist and social media influencer, where she disseminates scientific information for her followers. She talks about hot button issues, human resource challenges like imposter syndrome, and other viewpoints to help educate her audience. With a bachelor's, master's, and PhD, she has considerable knowledge under her hat. And finally, joining us is Portia Stewart. She started Mindful Creatives this past year, where she serves as a content strategist, team leader, and creative consultant. She's passionate about helping companies utilize workshops that use design thinking and mindfulness principles to unlock the flow of ideas. With more than 20 years of experience in idea and content generation, she's passionate about helping people generate ideas that move the needle. Well, I'm certainly surrounded by a lot of experts here, and it's hard to imagine that any of you guys would have ever experienced something like imposter syndrome, but I know it's a reality of life. So I think first, let me open this up. I defined imposter syndrome by what I found it to be through Google and personal experience. I'm curious, it might be a term some of our users are unfamiliar with. So how would each of you define imposter syndrome? And maybe is there a way you've experienced it yourself? So I'll start with you, Lynn.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Imposter syndrome. I think when you in your opening you discussed it as this kind of doubt, just ever present doubt about whether you've truly belong where you are, whether you've really achieved what you think you've achieved. And when listening to what people say and hearing the positive, but maybe just kind of not hearing the positive but not taking it in and just focusing on the negative thoughts in your mind. And for me, with respect to imposter syndrome, I think the biggest example of it in my life is waiting 15 years after getting my PhD to finally feel that I was ready to apply for a tenure track position.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we all experience it so differently. So Lynn, you're a published or not Lynn, I'm sorry. Jen, you're a published author and you're a farmer and you are an influencer on social media. What is imposter syndrome to you and what's that experience been like for you?
Um, it's a lot. To me, it's a feeling that I have. I honestly had never heard of it till we talked about it on our podcast a couple months ago. And someone said, "Oh, well, you've got imposter syndrome." I'm like, "What?" And so I've done a little research on it, and it feels funny saying that I diagnosed myself with imposter syndrome, but what I've read is like everything I feel. So it's feelings to me. It feels like everything you've done or accomplished feels like it just came from dumb luck or being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people. Um, I'm a farmer. It's hard for me to say that. I come from generations where that's a term that you earn, and I don't know that I've earned it. I don't feel like I have. Would I be a farmer if I hadn't married Chris? I have no idea. Would I have written a children's book if we hadn't have gotten a bottle calf that needed care? Would I be a columnist had somebody not taken a chance on me? Because all of these things that I've done, I don't have the credentials at all. I'm not a college educated person. I'm not formally educated. Um, so where do you get the right to call yourself that? It's a feeling, and it's hard to get over it.
Hmm. Definitely agree with that. It's difficult to get over, difficult to get past. And Portia, in full transparency, I used to work with Portia, and it's hard for me to imagine you having ever experienced imposter syndrome because I've seen you at work too. So tell me about what it is to you.
Great questions, Sonia. And I would say I agree with what everybody else has already said, but I do think about those limiting beliefs that tend to crop up. So I am limited. I am time bound. I'm not meeting my schedule. I'm lacking in something. I am confused or disconnected from people around me, or I am in some way incomplete. There's something else I need to do to be the best, right? And I love speaking. I love being in the front of the room, but every dang time I go to that front of the room, I'm thinking, what did I do? Well, how did I get myself into this? So just recognizing that we all have those feelings and powering through it. And because it is May the 4th, for you guys who are Star Wars fans, I would say one of the things I always try to teach my kids is something that Yoda said, do or do not, there's no try, right? So if we can kind of channel Yoda in these moments and say, I can do this, I am completely, listen to that. We call ourselves, we think about our inner critic all the time, and my inner critic is over here on my shoulder all the time. But thinking about our inner counselor, that person inside of us, that other part of us who can say, hey, you know what, you are good enough, and you can be successful, and failure is not a bad thing. It's experimentation. So that's really what I think about when I think about imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a point there, Portia, that I think leads into a question that I hadn't really considered. And you mentioned failure. Like, imposter syndrome's tough because there's that constant fear of failure, but it's part of the everyday work life. And so I'm curious, how do we, in our efforts to overcome imposter syndrome, still address when we do fail? Because we're never going to be perfect at what we're doing. We're going to mess something up. I'm going to say something wrong on Seed Speaks. We're going to do something wrong. How do we get past that failure while still trying to kind of hype ourselves up with that inner counselor?
One of the things that I talk about a lot in my workshops and when I'm working with clients is the fact that you really have to fail all the time. Failure is not, if we stop defining it as failure and start defining it as learning. So, when you look at all the companies that are doing the biggest, greatest things, they have 50 failures for everything that's maybe marginally successful. So if we stop thinking of these things as failures and start thinking of it as experimentation and learning, and that we're actually getting knowledge out of this, we're going to see ourselves moving the needle. We build confidence in the people who work for and with us, and it becomes collaborative. It becomes collaborative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Lynn, we're talking about imposter syndrome, and in the research that I found, women will talk about it, men won't. They probably need to. So let's talk about that. Lynn, why does this conversation about imposter syndrome, addressing the fact that it exists and addressing maybe methods to overcome it, why is this conversation important?
I guess for me it's important. I'm thinking, and one, for my own self, I'm thrilled to be on the show and to listen to what Jen and Portia have to say, because I want this chance and this opportunity to try and boost myself and bring myself and stop doubting myself. But I'm leading a lab with lots of new students, and I want them to be better than me. I want them to be better than me in lots of different ways. I want them to be better scientists. I want them to be better extension educators, but I want them to be better, more confident people. And I think having this conversation here, having this conversation online, having it in person with my colleagues is, maybe we can help break a cycle and, you know, improve the, you know, the next leaders in agriculture is what I want to do. I understand, yeah, the failure. It's a learning opportunity, but I want my students to respond better to failure than I have. I want my students to say, yeah, okay, didn't work. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to change. We're going to go on, and maybe not have it compound in a negative way, like maybe it has with me through parts of my academic career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good lessons, and a fun thing to think about, being able to help someone through our own experiences to not feel the same way. And Jen, I'm curious. So you're a business owner. You have your own farm. You have children who I'm sure you have worked with on the farm and things like that. How has imposter syndrome, aside from any feelings you might have yourself, how have you seen it hinder the success of others on your farm? Or from a personal perspective, as a business owner, how can it hinder your ability as a business owner to maybe take that step to write a children's book or whatever the next adventure is?
So writing a children's book, I kind of am one of those people who get an idea and like, okay, let's do it. What can happen? I think it was important for me, and I hope my kids learned this because I tried to teach them that it's kind of like if you don't experience bad or hard times in life, you never appreciate or know the good. And I think failure is the same thing. I mean, failure is a part of life. I mean, you may think that everyone around you is succeeding at everything and they always get what they want, but it's kind of a lot like social media. No one goes around announcing their failures. Um, of course they're going to announce when good things happened, but no one's going to announce that it took 15 tries to finally get 15 failures to get a really good success. So, I think it's really important that everyone knows that, it's to have these conversations and to teach your kids that failure is part of life. Um, it's like being in a hole. You can build yourself up to get out of that hole, but failure helps make the good better. I'm not sure I'm making sense, but it makes sense in my head.
No, I think that made perfect sense. And I think you guys have each kind of hinted at a question we have from Alex Hahn. And this is the idea of, how can you talk to people who are on the same level as you, coworkers, friends, maybe they're not employees, who might also be struggling with imposter syndrome? How can we encourage others to get out of their own heads? How can we, help them understand the value they're bringing their family, their organization, their workplace? What can we encourage her? And we'll start with Portia.
So I think one of the things that I have valued the most in opportunities I've had to be on teams is being the person and volunteering to be the person who says, I am happy to talk to you anytime you have concerns, anytime you're starting to doubt yourself. And that, like, those conversations, letting people share their ideas and being open to hearing them and giving them your best advice, and just being supportive and encouraging. In this book, one of my favorite books is called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And Gordon McKenzie is this amazing guy who worked at Hallmark for many years. And at some point, he appointed himself just a guru, and he created this amazing office with all these like chairs hanging from the ceiling. And I'm saying all this because one of the things he did at Hallmark was tell everybody yes. And he had no authority to do that, but people thought because he was like this chief guru that he knew something, and he just said yes all the time. And saying yes is very powerful. If somebody brings you an idea, and if somebody is willing to put themselves out there, being supportive, being a listener, and certainly making yourself emotionally available, I think is really important. And I love having these conversations. Anytime somebody has something they want to bounce off, or just being a supportive person, I think really helps.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Lynn, with your students or, other faculty members who are maybe newer than you are, just someone, you can encourage, what are those conversations like for you?
With respect to my students, we address things that don't go right. We didn't get this grant, we didn't get the results that we wanted, and we address them clearly and why we think that is and what personally we can do better. But one thing I have told my students that I hope will help with imposter syndrome, maybe alleviate it or mitigate it, is that we often tend to focus in academia on results. Like you've got to do this and you've got to get these results. You've got to get X many papers and you've got to get these metrics, and that's a sign of success. And if things happen and you don't get them, I think it really adds to that. Well, I'm not meant to be here. I'm not supposed to do that. So I have taken an approach, maybe not directly to the imposter syndrome itself, but to their well-being in general, is that, in my opinion, yes, we're going to work towards metrics, but they are the ultimate pinnacle of their degree program. Their development as a scientist, as an educator, as a person is the ultimate success. I'm not expecting 10 papers. I don't want this. I want them to be strong and happy and confident, and I want their growth in all of these different areas to be what defines them. And so I think focusing on them as human beings, and not, they're not cogs in some sort of wheel to achieve something, that they are unique and important, and that's what I tell them and what I focus on, to maybe hope that they will come out of this academic institution, not focusing on things that they weren't successful at.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Jen, I'm curious because you're in a unique situation, as all farmers are, in that your coworker is your husband and your family. And I'm sure I've never worked with my husband before, but I'm sure that brings all sorts of joys and challenges all at the same time. But I'm curious because one thing that you get to do, and I think all of us who have family and have people we want to encourage, we all want to encourage our spouses. We all want to encourage our in-laws as well. And you get this extra bonus on top of it, is you're encouraging them as a professional too. So how are you encouraging your family, beyond just the fact that you love them, but as the professional farmer that they are as well?
I think that's fascinating because it's tough working with family. Two of my favorite sayings, I think, are, my sister actually gave me these: always try to speak your truth with love and kindness. And is that truth productive? And that's a really hard one. I think that, how do I be encouraging, I think is where what you ask. And I'm not sure I always am, because I don't know why. We're not always, when we work with family, we're not always as polite as we could be as if we work with strangers. I don't know why. I always love to say thank you. That's my favorite thing to say. Like if Chris has to come to the field to help me out of a problem I've caused, I always say thank you. I appreciate the time. I know you were busy. On the other side of things, I think that we let people into our heads. Like we spend so much time in our own headspace that we let other people into our head, and the thoughts that they have can really impact us as well. Just in all truth, my father-in-law is probably one of the hardest persons I've ever worked with. And I think when I not only spend so much time in my head as my worst critic, I always say my inner critic is an asshole, because she really is. Sorry if I wasn't allowed to cuss. But I think we let other people into our head as well. And then their thoughts of us, whether negative or positive, affect us so much. One of the things I've encouraged everyone around here to do, and I have read it several times, is you need to read the energy bus, and you need to take inventory. Sometimes during the busy season, I have to do it daily, about who is going to be on my energy bus helping me drive and get my work done. Because if you're not bringing positive energy to help me get my work done, you get kicked off my energy bus. Because I can't work with my inner critic being an asshole and someone else behind me also being that way.
Mhm. I think that you brought up a good point there, and that is the influence that others have on us in the way that we feel about imposter syndrome or our own abilities.
Mhm.
And so I'll pose this question to each of you. When you think back to your first perhaps major failure or major happening as a professional, what what do you wish your manager would have done in that situation? Because those first failures in our professional career are something that kind of helps set up the confidence we have throughout the rest of our career. So, what do you wish your manager would have done? Or if you were in that same position working with an employee who made the same mistake, what do you want to do to be a good manager or a good encourager, despite the fact that you have to address the failure? You absolutely have to address the failure. So, we'll start with Lynn.
Actually, Portia just mentioned in the chat that she needs to hop off to catch a bus. So I think we should go to her.
Good call.
So I will make sure that I try to answer as completely, and sorry to be on this time crunch. We're in the middle of travel, but so one of the things that I think that you can do is make sure when you're framing criticism, how are the ways that you can find the good things that they did positively? Because there's always something there, that they were responsive or that they listened, and maybe they didn't completely understand something. So being very aware of what you can say and how you can be encouraging. Being a mentor is one of the most valuable things you can do, and emulating what you want other people to perform for you, and being a guidance person, and saying, hey, I'll help you along with this. Let's figure out how you can do this next time. And so just like, if you can be that mentor for somebody else, you will have lifelong friends and opportunities from being that mentor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Portia, and I hope you have safe travels. I don't want to keep you from catching your bus, so we'll
Thank you,
catch you later.
guys.
Thank you. All right. So, Lynn, what is something that you wish a manager would have said to you, or something that you wish you could say to someone when they're experiencing maybe their first defining failure?
Yeah. I've certainly had my own share of mishaps and whatnot, and I'm not sure what I wish someone would say to me, or unless it's maybe it comes down to what I want to say to my students is, the first thing we do is like, okay, let's calm down. Things didn't work. This isn't going the right way. Let's step back, right? Let's not let emotion, cloud everything more than it is. Let's think about this, and then, yeah, then usually the next thing I do is I ask, was there something I could have done? Was I not as clear with instructions, or did I not express something? I want to know if I, as the PI in my lab, did I do something? Because I don't want them to feel saddled with everything, like they did something wrong, because there's a good chance maybe I, neglected to say, oh wait, no, do this step. And then, the other thing is there was a quote. I went to the Van Gogh experience exhibit, and it was just basically that success is a string of failures. Success comes from a string of failures or something along those lines. And just like, okay, what can we learn? What can we do better from this? And again, this isn't the end. It's in anything. It's a start. It's our next step to trying something different, to adjusting, to moving forward. And I am not always, this may be positive in my own head, but this is the approach I'm taking with my lab and my program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Jen, from your perspective, how would you have preferred to receive that feedback when something wasn't right, that would have helped encourage you, early on in your career, or even today, something that could really help shape or reshape these feelings of imposter syndrome to maybe be less present?
That's a good question. And I don't know, I try to think, I try to I try. I don't, oh, my kids will tell you I don't always succeed. I always try to speak to people the way I would want to be spoken to. Um, you know, and I'm not, and I'm going to tell you right now, I've been on Prozac for 25 years, and um, that was a game changer for me personally. Um, and I always think that we try to speak to people like we want to be spoken to, but I think what we have to do is figure out what motivates or what helps each individual person, because the way I want to be spoken to is definitely not the way my husband wants to be spoken to. Like, I want someone to pat me on the back and tell me it's going to be okay and we'll figure it out, which is what he always does. And but he just wants the problem solved right away. Like, I want assured that this isn't, I need assurance. He just wants the work done. So I think if we're talking about an employer looking at their employees, I think you have to figure out what each of those employees needs to motivate them or to make them feel better. I know I learned a long time ago with my kids, I had to do that. I hope my girls aren't watching, because I'm going to tell you a story real quick. My oldest, you look her in the eye and you tell her, this is serious. This is what's going on. You need to take this seriously. And I just assumed all kids needed that. And my middle was 4 and in a wedding. And so I looked her in the eye and I told her, I said, this is serious. This is the bride's day. This is what you're going to do, blah, blah, blah. All I did was make her nervous, and she picked her nose the entire ceremony. Because what she needed to hear, and I've learned this since, and she graduates college this weekend, what she needs to hear is, smile, Em, have fun, be good, and do your best. You know, people are so different. I think we need to find what motivates each person. And that's hard. Don't get me wrong.
No, I think that's a really good example. We all communicate differently, and that does affect our delivery and who we work with. And when I think about, the team that I work with, we all communicate so differently, and the way that I work with each of them is completely different. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, we are getting close on time, but I have one question that I really want to ask because it's very relevant to today. And, in 2020, we had this huge shutdown, and people weren't able to leave their homes, and people who had never worked from home before started working from home. And I think that this going home and working from home might have amplified some of those feelings of inadequacy, because you're at home and your boss can't see you working. And so I'm curious, from your guys' perspective, do you think that people being forced to work from home might have heightened those feelings of inadequacy? And what's the solution? And we're tight on time, so I'll have you guys be pretty quick in your answers. But what has work from home done to the psyche of the employee when it comes to imposter syndrome? And Lynn, we'll start with you.
So I can only speak for myself. Working from home, and I'm working from home right now just because it's quieter. It did not work for me. I was a new faculty member, and I just started, and suddenly having the world shut down and having all of my opportunities shut down did not. It heightened it for me, because here I was trying to get started, and I couldn't meet people. I couldn't do research, and it was, I'm hired by Cornell University in this position, and all I'm doing is failing because I can't do anything. And there was a question in the chat from Ashley about imposter syndrome affecting my mental health, in mental health. And it's like, is it a chicken or an egg? Did it make my, is all of this, is imposter syndrome and everything making my mental health worse? Or I'm very open about OCD, having anxiety, having mental health issues, or is my mental health making the imposter syndrome worse? And I think adding kind of COVID restrictions onto all of that, it did not help for me. And it was very, very, very tough on me. And I'm very glad that it's spring and I'm back out in the field.
Mm-hmm. I don't think you're alone in feeling like that once we transitioned to home, because I know I've always had part from home, but being totally from home made things a little different, and having a job switch at the same time was also a pretty big challenge. So I understand that. And Jen, you've actually probably always worked from home. So tell us about that.
I've always worked from home. I'm a little bit of an introvert. And so being as I'm an introvert and I've always worked from home and always worked alone, so to speak, it didn't phase me in the least. I think that just looking at other people and talking to other people and friends, I think some people loved it. They relished in it. It was like a dream come true for them. They got to do their job and they got to do what they wanted to do, but they got to do it from home. It was less competition watching people on a daily basis. They were in their comfort zone. And then you have the opposite effect on those other people who needed that stimulation from other people and that constant bouncing off of ideas, but also the adrenaline of working with other people. It was fine for me.
Mhm. Yeah, it points back to it takes all kinds and all personalities, and it affects us all differently. So, all right. Well, that is unfortunately all the time we have for today. I've actually run us a little over on time, so I hope I have not kept you guys from lunch or anything else important. But thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, Jen. And thank you, Portia, even though you're not on. We appreciate all of your insights today. This is a critical topic for anyone who is currently working and anyone who's a manager, because managers, obviously, on everything we've said here, have such a huge impact on how employees feel and how they feel valued. So, really great conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And be sure to tune in next week to our next episode of Seed Speaks, where we continue diving into these HR issues and how to make employees more effective and more comfortable in the workplace. It'll be at noon Central Time. We'll see you next week.